All right, we'll say good morning. Begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar, Yona Shushie Ehrenfeld, for dedicating all the Shurman Drushos this month, nishmas, their grandfather Yosef and Shmuel Aron. Our Talmud Torah sponsor, Marc Karstaedt, for dedicating Shurman Drushos this month in memory of his mother, Chana Bat Shraggai. Our Day of Learning sponsors, Zalman Dov and Susan Leiter, Lezecha Nishmas, Zalman's father on the occasion of his Shloshim Yonason Tzvi ben Moshe Zichron Livracha. Our Daf Yomi sponsors, Richard and Judy Noodleman, in memory of Richard's father, Jack Noodleman, Yaakov ben Moshe Tzvi, Chaim and Chana Rothschild, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Chaim's mother, Sarah Rivka Bas Laser, Michael and Rachel Terniansky, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Michael's father, Simon Terniansky, Shimon Yaakov ben Baruch Elimelech. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families in nechama. And above with that, let us begin. We have the incredible zechus today to begin a brand new perek in Maseches Yoma. Incredible opportunity, a beautiful perek ahead of us to continue along a little bit in the avodah. So now, whereas the first perek was totally focused on the sequestering and preparation of the Kohen Gadol, the second perek kind of zooms out a little bit and focuses more on the generalities of, I shouldn't say the second perek. Right now, this Mishnah focuses a bit more on the generalities of the avodah. But in Meretz Hashem, of course, we will find our way back. We will find our way back to the avodah of Yom Kippur as well. So we'll say, here we go. But Rishona, Komi Sharotza Litrom Es HaMizbeach Torin. We'll say in the beginning, whoever wanted to go out and do Trumas Hadeshin. So we'll say, so remember again, we spoke about Trumas Hadeshin a little bit at the end of the last parak, which is in the morning, the first avodah that was done was the removal of ash. Now remember again, there was removal of ash from the outer Mizbeach and from the menorah. The truth is there was also removal of ash from the inner Mizbeach as well, the Mizbeach HaKetoras. So this was the first avodah done in the morning. Important to note, as I mentioned, at least for the outer Mizbeach, they did not remove all of the ash from the top of the Mizbeach, right? They only actually took a little bit of ash, we'll get into this a little bit more, and deposited on the ground by the side of the Mizbeach. In fact, we saw in yesterday's daf that was one of the miracles of the Beis HaMikdash, which was what? That they would put the ash down on the ground, and what would happen? It would get swallowed up by the ground. That was one of the miracles in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara says, if you look at Rashi for just a moment, Barishona Komisha Rotza Litrom, Kol Kohen Shahaya Me'oso Beis Av, Rotza Litrom Hadeshin Shachris, Torim Velo Haya Payis Adar. So Rashi just points out, when we say whoever wanted to go ahead and do the Trumas Hadeshin could do so. So remember again, we have to qualify that statement. Whoever means what? It doesn't mean any Kohen could come in off the street. Remember again, there are 24 mishmoros. Each mishmar was given a week in the Beis HaMikdash. A mishmar was made up of multiple batei avos, multiple families. And again, each family served for a particular time. So whoever, in other words, when we say whoever, that means any Kohen whose Beis Av, whose family was serving in the Mikdash that day, had the right to claim the avodah of the Trumas Hadeshin for himself. Ubizman Shemirubin, what happens again if more than one Kohen shows up in the morning to do the avodah? This is great. Ratzin va'olin bekevesh. So they race up the ramp of the Mizbeach. And I will say whoever reaches, now again, we're going to see, the Gemara is going to say, what's the finish line? It says they race up the ramp to where? Where are they running to? What's the finish line of the race? This is great. Whoever crosses the finish line first, but you have to beat your friend by Dalet Amos. In other words, it's not just enough to go ahead and have a neck-and-neck race and for one Kohen to win, but he has to go ahead and be more than 4 Amos in front of his fellow Kohen. Vim hayu shnei shavin. What happens if both Kohanim cross the finish line at the same time? So we'll say, remember again, cross the finish line at the same time is a relative statement. Either means literally they're tied, or it means what? It means what? They're within Dalet Amos of each other. So we'll say, so what do you do in that kind of case? This is great. Hamamuna Omer Lahem. So we'll say the Mamuna was the Kohen who was in charge of handing out the lotteries, or I should say running the lotteries, the payosim. So the Gemara says, Hamamuna Omer Lahem Hatzbiu. The Mamuna would say to them, stick out a finger. Rashi says over here, Hatzbiu, Hutziu Etzba'osechem. extend the finger. Kol echad yira etzba'o kidim afarish l'kamam apirkin. I suppose you know what we'll see is Rashi goes ahead and gives you the whole Gemara, but we'll save it for the Gemara. So the Mamona tells them, stick out a finger, umahi motziin, and ultimately again, what do they extend? Achos oshtayim. You have the choice. Every coin has the choice to extend. Rashi and Sirabo say that the coin would stand in a circle, and every coin had the choice to extend either one or two fingers. Ve'ein motziin agudul b'mikdash. But you can't put out a thumb. Can't put out a thumb for reasons in Meretz Hashem that we will see. One time, two kohanim were going ahead and racing up the ramp. V'ratz, the Gemara says, ba'olin b'kevesh, they're racing up the ramp. V'dachav echad mehenes chaveiro v'nafal v'nishbar raglo. And the race got a little bit intense. One Kohen went ahead and pushed his fellow off the ramp, and the Kohen who fell off the ramp broke his leg. Kevan shiro bezdin shabolin de sakana. Once the bezdin saw that, again, now, we'll say there's an element of sakana, it's getting a bit too competitive. Right? There's an element of sakana, they're pushing each other off the ramps. Hiskinu shlo yotermenes hamizbeach ela b'payis. They decided, you know what? It's not kol hakodim zachabah. It's not whoever shows up gets to do this avoda, but rather, again, the only way you get to do the avoda of the Trumas Hadeshen is to draw lots. So therefore, they made it into a lottery. This way it was a little bit more organized, and the lottery would decide who would get the opportunity to do this avoda. Arba payasos hayusham. There were 4 lotteries which were drawn inside of the Beis Hamikdash. V'zeh hapayas harishon. And this particular lottery for the Trumas Hadeshen was the first one. Good about say so. This is opening Mishnah of the second parak, totally focused on the Trumas Hadeshen. Says the Gemara, v'hamei kara, my time lo takinule rabbanan paisa. So we'll say, so I don't understand. Why didn't they just go ahead and make the Trumas Hadeshen subject to lottery from the beginning? In other words, the evolution of the Trumas Hadeshen is quite interesting. In the beginning, whoever wanted to do it showed up and did it. More than 2 people showed up and did it, they raced. If they were tied, you drew a lot. People racing up, one pushed each other off the ramp, broke his leg, then they made it a mandatory lottery. Why not just make it a lottery from the beginning? So we'll say this is incredible. So the Gemara says, Me'ikara, Savar kibun da avodas lailahi lo chashiv lahu v'lo asu. Because it said Trumas Hadeshen is avodas laila. Now, what does that mean? Trumas Hadeshen was done really before dawn, even before dawn, right, or right at dawn. So it's not, it's before normal daybreak. So it's avodas laila. Because it's avodas laila, people, the kohanim, didn't think it was so chashiv v'lo asu, and they didn't come. And I will say for them it was Trumas Hadeshen. Trumas Hadeshen is taking out the trash. Right, so people didn't think it was so chashiv. So the Kohanim did not feel, the Rabbanim did not feel, that halacha l'maaseh they had to go ahead and institute a lottery for it. They were happy with what? With whoever would show up. Kevan dechazu dekaasu va'asuli de sakana. But then they saw the Kohanim were actually coming, and not only that, but again, unfortunately, it was becoming a little bit of a dangerous matzav. Takinu luhu paisa. So they went ahead and they established a lottery. So the Gemara says, okay, so let's talk about this just a moment. So you're telling me the reason that they did not establish a lottery from the beginning was because of a general feeling that people were not, Kohanim, were not so interested in this avoda. And why were they not so interested in this avoda? Because it is avodas laila. It's avodas laila. It's a nighttime avoda. And I must remember again, first of all, is there nighttime avoda? No. Remember, again, I will say at night, pretty much all that's happening are like support services. So they felt, now again, Trumas Hadeshen happens to be part of the Avoda, but Lamaisa, they felt that the Kohanim really relegated it to a second tier of importance, and therefore, we're happy with whoever shows up. Once they saw it became a little bit competitive, to the point that Kohanim were mamish pushing each other off ramps, then again, they instituted a pious. The Gemara says, 1 second. They will say now the burning of the leftover fat limbs. Remember again, so there are no korbanos offered up at night. The only thing you do at night is you burn the leftover fat limbs from the korbanos of the day. So that's mamish done at real night. And yet, I will say there was a lottery that was drawn for that avoda. So you see over here that the Kohanim do want to do the avodas laila. They do care about avodas laila. So at the end of the day, why would you not draw a lottery for it? To which the Gemara says, no. because it's incredible. Because the Haktaras Ivarim Pedarim, that's Sof Avoda Diyamamahi. That's ultimately, again, the end of daytime avodah. So we'll say here this distinction. There's a chiluk, says the Gemara, between that which is the end of daytime avodah versus what we'll call nighttime avodah. So the end of daytime avodah, Haktaras Ivarim Pedarim, the burning of the limbs, that the Kohanim are interested in. But Shumas Hadeshen, which is nighttime avodah, that they weren't so interested in. So the Gemara says, Hai nami tchilas avodah diyamamahi. But why don't you go ahead? You could easily relabel Shumas Hadeshen Rabosai as what? As the beginning of daytime avodah. In other words, you don't have to call it Shumas Hadeshen nighttime avodah. You could just as easily call it Shumas Hadeshen the beginning of daytime avodah. And shouldn't that go ahead and elevate it to a position of chashivus? The Rabbi Yochanan, because we'll say after all we learned, Rabbi Yochanan said, Kiddush Yadav L'Trumas Hadeshen. If a Kohen did, remember again, before the Kohen does avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, he must do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. He must sanctify, wash his hands and feet. So if a Kohen went ahead and washed his hands for Trumas Hadeshen, L'Machar Ein Tzarech L'Kadesh. The next day, and I was remember again, what does it mean the next day? Was remember again from the next Mishnah. When was Trumas Hadeshen done? Remember, little Chazar, when was Trumas Hadeshen done according to the Mishnah? Right? What was the term the Mishnah used? Kriyas HaGever, right? Kriyas HaGever. And the Mishnah said either at Kriyas HaGever, a little bit before Kriyas HaGever, after Kriyas HaGever. So remember again, paskening like Rav, that Kriyas HaGever means, well, it doesn't matter. We don't have to get to them out focus. So we'll say, so again, which means that you could do Trumas Hadeshen before dawn. A little, not too much, but a little bit before dawn. So now the interesting part over here is, remember, before dawn, what's the status of before dawn? It's Laila, it's night. Yet, interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, if a Kohen did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for Trumas Hadeshen before dawn, he need not do another Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim after dawn. Which tells you what? That Trumas Hadeshen is really Tchilas Avoda Diyom. It's the beginning of daytime avoda. So why do you tell me that? Why are you treating Trumas Hadeshen like nighttime avoda? It's the beginning of daytime avoda. To which the Gemara says, Ema shekvar kidesh mitchila la'avoda. No. So the Gemara says, all it means, it doesn't necessarily mean that Trumas Hadeshen is a daytime avoda. It just means that Trumas Hadeshen is the beginning of avoda. So since you did Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for avoda, you need not repeat it again for the next avoda. Ikadam, you're supposed to say, but it's still was still looked at by the Kohanim as what? As avodas laila. Ikadamri. May Karasavar Kevan Diika Oneshina. Listen to this. Another possibility is also. So remember again, here's what we're trying to understand. Clearly, the fact that the Rabbanon did not institute a lottery for Trumas Hadeshen in the beginning, but rather the lottery was only a reaction to some violent Kohanic behavior, indicates to us that Kohanim were not so interested in Trumas Hadeshen to begin with. So there was no lottery because the Rabbanon were happy with whoever showed up to do the avodah. We're trying to understand why that is. So the Gemara wanted to suggest because it's avodas laila. Well, what about Haktaras Ivarim Upedarim? That's also avodas laila. To which the Gemara says, no, they looked at that as how? They looked at it as sof avodas yom. Haktaras Ivarim Upedarim, the burning of the fats and limbs, that was more looked at as the end of daytime avodah, not so much nighttime avodah. But the Gemara says, but again, you could just as easily look at Trumas Hadeshen as the beginning of daytime avodah. V'haraya, if you do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for Trumas Hadeshen, you need not repeat it for subsequent avodah. So the Gemara says, okay, Ikadamri, Meikara Savar, Kevon Diika Ones Shina, Lo Asu. So also listen to this. So the Rabbanan thought the following: since Trumas Hadeshen takes place early in the morning, and people generally do not like to get up early in the morning. You know, I will say, it's interesting how the Gemara refers to this as ones shena. I will say, ones means extenuating circumstances beyond your control. There's sometimes early in the morning, there's ones shena. This doesn't even need any explanation, right? This is especially to the Chaver, right? This is self-evident, right? The feeling that you have sometimes when you have to wake up early in the morning and you mamish feel, this is literally impossible. This is impossible. And the good news is, because in the morning you have enough lumdus going on to justify sleeping later, you say, if it's ones shena, we'll say, what's the halacha by ones? Halacha by ones? Ones Rachmana Patre, right? There was extenuating circumstances. Your part is like this. Since in the morning, this Ones Shina. And remember again, this is mamish very early, right? This is already. If you wanted to do Trumas Hadeshan, you were waking up a good amount before dawn. Lo asu. So people aren't getting up that early. Kevan dechaza the asu v'ka asu nami lidei sakana takina li rabbanan paisa. But then the Rabbanan were very surprised and they said, no, Kohanim are coming. And not only are they coming, but what? They're shtickle pushy, right? They're even getting a little into this, a little too into this. They instituted a lottery. Says the Gemara, but 1 second, I will say, the burning of the leftover fats and limbs, that was done late at night. Is there not ones shina? Is there not also a concern that the Kohanim are going to go to sleep and not do this avoda? But this is so profound. To which the Gemara says, "Shiny migna mimekam." We all know it is so much easier to delay going to sleep, to go to sleep later in order to do something, than it is to wake up early. So therefore, again, on both sides, there was no concern that there wouldn't be Kohanim interested in haktar sevarim pudarim, even though that would require them to go to sleep later. Because again, if you have something you have to do, you go to sleep later. But again, there's no, so the Gemara is saying is there's no ones shena with going to sleep. But there is ones shena ultimately again with waking up. V'takanta lahach gisa havi. So the Gemara says, is this why they made this takana? If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, v'takanta lahach gisa havi kushihi v'chi mitnei takala she'ira niskan lapayis. We'll say, when you read the Mishnah, so the Mishnah makes it sound like the entire reason why they made a lottery for Trumas Hadeshan was why? Why? Because of the incident that occurred. Right? It sounds like that incident where the two Kohanim were racing up the ramp and one pushed the other off the ramp and he fell and broke his leg. That was the entire reason for the lottery. So the Gemara says, is that true? Takanta lahaiki sahavi. In fact, the takana to make a payis, to make a lottery for the Trumas Hadeshan, was actually for another reason. What was the other reason? This sanya, Misha zacha b'Trumas Hadeshan, yiske b'sidr ma'aracha, ub'shnei gzirei eitzim. We'll discuss this more, but we're going to see as follows. In fact, what happened was, Rabbi said, that when they drew the lottery for the Trumas Hadeshan, the avodah of the Trumas Hadeshan was actually bundled with two other avodos. If you won the lottery for Trumas Hadeshan, you also got to go out, you also won the privilege of setting up the ma'aracha, the pyre on top of the mizbeach, ub'shnei gizirei eitzim, and arranging the two logs, the two pieces of wood. Again, we'll discuss all of these avodos in Yirtzeh Hashem. Loge Rashi, v'hai lahai gisa, it's in the wide lines of Rashi, five lines in. V'ha lahai gisa havi, b'shvil sidr ha-ma'aracha, u'shnei gizirei eitzim, shatorim hu ha-mesader, v'cheivan dekulan b'koin echad, yesh kan avodos chashivos, u'meikara bo payis. So the Gemara says, you make it sound like the only reason they instituted a lottery for Trumas Hadeshan was because of the episode where one coin pushed the other off the ramp, but that's not true. They made a lottery for the Trumas Hadeshan. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, whoever won the Trumas Hadeshan lottery also got other avodos. To which the Gemara says, here we go. So we'll say here, Rav Ashi comes along and now gives us the whole picture, and this is the conclusion of this section. Here we go. It says, Amar Rav Ashi, Shtei takanos havu. In fact, Rabbi say there were two different takanos when it came to the Trumas Hadeshan. Me'ikara, in the beginning, savar lo asu. The Rabbanan were afraid that Kohanim would not show up for the Trumas Hadeshan. After all, it takes place around dawn, right? There's ones shena, right? People we all like to sleep, right? So therefore, they were afraid no one was going to come. Therefore, originally, there was no lottery for the Trumas Hadeshan. Kevan dechazu de ka'asu, va'asu nami lidei sakana, takina lepaisa. So I'll say what happens. Then when they saw the Kohanim were showing up, not only were they showing up, but what? They were a shtickle aggressive, right? They were even pushing each other off ramps. So they said, okay, we need to rein this in. And they established the lottery. They both say, now watch what happens. Takina lepaisa. Kevan de takina lepaisa, lo asu. Once they established the lottery, the Kohanim stopped showing up. Why? Amri mi yemar de misramilan. Chazal said, listen to this. I'm happy to wake up to do the Trumas Hadeshan if what? if I know it's mine. I'm not waking up for a lottery, right? Because also remember, again, only one person wins that lottery, and depending on the number of Kohanim who show up, the statistical probability of it being me diminishes. So we'll say, in halacha, there's a concept, bari v'shema, bari adif, right? So the bari is, I could sleep. The shema is, maybe I'll win the Trumas Hadeshen. I'll take sleep, right? I'll take sleep. Sleep is guaranteed. So we'll say, so amazingly enough, when they instituted the lottery, Kohanim once again stopped showing up. Hadir takinaluhu misha zacha b'Trumas Hadeshen yiske b'sidor ma'aracha u'b'shnei gezirei eitzim kihechi denesu v'nefaises. So we'll say, so what did the Rabbanim do? They had to sweeten the deal, right? So how did they sweeten the deal? They said, okay, whoever wins the lottery for Trumas Hadeshen will also get to do these. Again, so we'll say this way, people would show up, Kohanim would show up, would wake up early, even though, again, they may not win the lottery, because at the end of the day, this lottery was quite significant. Whoever won this lottery had the privilege of doing the first 3 avodos of the day. So we'll say that, according to Rav Ashi, now we understand the evolution of this story. So in reality, so right, first we start off with no lottery, then Baruch Hashem Kohanim show up, which is fine, and become aggressive. We have to institute the lottery. Once we institute lottery, people stop coming. Kohanim stop coming because, again, why should I wake up if I don't know for sure that I'm going to get to do this avodah? Attach other avodos to this lottery, and hence, again, Kohanim once again started showing up for the first lottery of the day, which was not only for Trumas Hadeshen, but also Trumas Hadeshen, Sidur HaMa'aracha, arrangement of the pyre, and Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, the placement of the 2 pieces of wood, which again we'll discuss in the Gemara weiter. But we'll say beautiful. Ubizman Shem Reuben. So we'll say, remember again. So the Mishnah said. First stage in the Mishnah was before they started doing lotteries, right? So whoever showed up, stage 1 was whoever showed up got to do the avoda. What happens if more than one person showed up? What would they do in stage 1? What would they do? A foot race, right? So the foot race. So now the Gemara says, Amra Papa. So we'll say. The interesting part, as I mentioned when learning the Mishnah, is it's not clear from the Mishnah what was the finish line of the foot race. So listen to the Gemara. Amar Papa, Pshitali arba amos da'ara lo. So we'll say it's clear that this wasn't a foot race on the ground of the Beis Hamikdash, right? Why? Because after all, the Mishnah says, Olin ratzin va'olin bakeveshtanan. Because the Mishnah clearly says they were running up the ramp. Right? So it wasn't the pshat that it was a foot race, we'll call it on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. Because again, it says they're going up the ramp. Fine. Kamaisa nami lo ratzin va'olin bekeveshtanan. So the Gemara says v'hadar kala kodem eschavero. So the Gemara says furthermore, it can't be that it's the first 4 amos. We'll say maybe it was just like a short race up the first 4 amos of the ramp, because again, the lashon of the Mishnah is ratzin va'olin, right? They run and they ascend, which sounds like they're traversing the entire area of the ramp. V'hadar kala kodem eschavero the beini namilo. For them, we'll say couldn't have been some arbitrary line on the ramp itself. Why? The Gemara says delo mesaima milsa, because we'll say how it's not clear. In other words, in order for the race to be won, you have to have some type of clear finish line. So for it to be somewhere just on the ramp that's not defined, there's no way to determine what the finish line is. The Gemara says pshitali degabi. I'm sorry. The one that was pshitali. Therefore, it becomes clear to me degabi mizbeach tanan. That I will say, where was the race until? The race was until the top of the mizbeach. So remember again, you would go up the ramp, and whoever reached the top of the mizbeach first won. Which I will say, interestingly enough, I think when we read the Mishnah, to most of us, at least I don't know, so this seems to be like the most intuitive, right? That it was a race up the ramp to the top of the mizbeach. Okay, but the Gemara needs to work through it, because again, at the end of the day, if you notice, the Mishnah does not say explicitly what the finish line was. Now the Gemara says the finish line was the top of the ramp. The Gemara says, Bayra Papa, Arba Amos Amru Behedja Ama Yisod Va'ama Sobe. So now the Gemara asks an interesting question. Papa asks, remember again, Abosai, by the base of the Mizbeach, there were two, I should say, by the base of the Mizbeach, there was a base, right? The 1 Amma base that extended around not all the sides of the Mizbeach, but some of the sides of the Mizbeach. And there was also a ledge. So we'll say, when we say up until the top of the Mizbeach, is that including the one amma of the Yesod and the Sovev, the one amma, ultimately again of the ledge and of the base that surrounded the Mizbeach, Amud Beis, O Dilma, Bar me amma Yesod the amma Sovev. Or maybe no, it's not including the amma of the Yesod, the amma of the Sovev, Teku, to which the Gemara leaves that question unanswered. So we'll say, what the Gemara is really asking is as follows. If you think about the one amma of the base and one amma of the ledge, so pretty much what that would mean, so the shaila is, when we say you reach the top of the Mizbeach, does that literally mean the top of the Mizbeach? Or does it mean once you get within 2 amos of what would be the ledge and the base? So the Gemara says, Tegu, we're not sure. The Gemara doesn't answer that. Okay, weiter. We're supposed to remember again. So now, in this first iteration where they're racing up, if the race was a tie, remember again, a tie occurs in one of 2 ways. Either A, they literally get to the top of the Mizbeach at the same time, or both we begin to see that what does a tie mean? They're within Daled Amas of each other. So what do you do in that case? The Kohen HaMamuna, the Kohen who's in charge of the lotteries, he says, Hatzviyu, he says, stick out a finger. Now, what I want to point out is as follows. I should have read this in Rashi in the Mishnah, but I didn't. To point out what's happening here is when they say that they stuck out a finger, the Kohen who was in charge of the lottery would assemble all of the Kohanim, right? It wasn't just the 2 tied Kohanim who would have the count off. It was all of the Kohanim who were around at that time would all be assembled in a circle. Now, the reason you do that is because, as you're going to see, you can't do a count off between 2 Kohanim, because pretty much the result becomes immediately known. You'll see in just a moment. So you have to imagine then the scene is they're gathering all the Kohanim in a circle. So here we go. Says the Gemara. Tana, Hotzia etzba'osechem, leminyan, v'nimninhu l'dido. So it says we're going to see, I should have read it in Rashi. I'll just tell you this outside. Here's what they would do, Rabbi said. They would go ahead and assemble the Kohanim in a circle. Right, the Kohanim, one of the Kohanim would remove his mitznefes, would remove his hat, and the Kohen Homamuna, the one who was in charge of the pious, would announce a number, Rashi points out. And it was a number that was much larger than the number of Kohanim assembled. So Rashi says, for example, he would choose 60, or he would choose 100, and every Kohen would have the right to go ahead and stick out 1 finger or 2 fingers. And what would happen? The Kohen would go ahead and count, he'd go around and count, and whichever Kohen, the final number, the count would fall out on, that was the Kohen who ultimately, again, was selected to do the avoda. That's how it worked. Now we'll get to the thumb issue, because the Mishnah said you can't stick out a thumb. We'll discuss why that is. But Rabbi said, but that's how the count occurred. So that's if you want to see it inside, that's in Rashi Hatzbiu. Okay, so it says the Gemara. So Tanu Otziu Espo Seichel Minyan, the Kohen who was in charge of the counting, or I should say of the pious, of the lotteries, would say, extend the finger of the minyan, v'nimninhu l'dido, and we'll count. Mesele Rabbi Yitzchak, Tam Rabbi Yitzchak, Aser limnos asisa. So we'll say, so the unspoken shaila of the Gemara is, why don't you just count off Kohanim? Why do you have to count fingers? Well, we'll say, why not just go ahead and say, okay, here's the number, I'll count Kohanim. Why are you counting fingers? To which Rabbi Yitzchak says, Aser limnos as Yisrael afilu dvar mitzvah. Because we'll say it supports the idea that says that halacha l'maisa, you are not permitted to count Jews. You're not permitted to count Jews even for a mitzvah purpose. Dichsiv vayif, because we'll say the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Shmuel Aleph, vayifkedem bivazek. So we'll say this is by Shaul HaMelech. The pasuk says that he was counting the Jews to see the size of the standing army. Vayifkedem bivazek. Now we'll say bazek means pottery shards. Pottery shards. So how did Shaul count Jews? He counted them with pottery shards. Each person would come and deposit his shard, and that's who knew the number of Klal Yisrael. Maskeh for Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi said, Mimai, Tahai Bazek Lishna de Mivzaku. How do you know that Bazek means a pottery shard? Maybe I will say Bazek is the name of a place. Rather, Rabbi said, we learn the notion that you can't count Jews from here. Vayishma Shaul as ha'am, vayifkedem bitiloim. That Shaul ultimately again, Vayishama Shaul as ha'am, Shaul once again gathered the nation. But this is once again to go out to war against the Plishtim. And what did he do? Vayifkedem bitiloim. And he counted them with sheep. So also you see from here two examples. Even if you want to say that bazek ultimately means a place and not pottery shards, we have two examples where counting was, or so fine, there's another example where Shaul counted people with sheep, but would not count people directly. And I will say, the Marsha and others all raise the same kasha, which is, I don't understand, why do you have to bring a pasuk in Navi to go out and tell me you can't count Jews? It's what I will say, it's Mufresh pasuk in the Torah, it's Parshas Kisisa, right? It's the whole section of Machtis HaShakel. So the Marsha has a whole arichos there. Again, maybe that was a din in the midbar, maybe this okay. So again, the point over here is the Gemara is actively choosing not to focus on Machtis HaShakel, in Parshas Kisisa, but instead is choosing to learn this out from other places. So the Gemara says, Amar Belazar, Kalamones Yisrael over Belav. So Belazar says, if you count Jews, you are in violation of Allah. Shnei Amar, v'hayom mispar b'nei Yisrael kichol hayom asher lo yimad. So we'll say the pasuk says, and again, here's what's fascinating is we're quoting a pasuk from Hosea, not the pasuk from Chumash, not the psukim, right? V'lo siabam negev bifkodosam. Torah says in Parashat Kisisa explicitly, don't count Jews. And if you count Jews, so we'll say, all right, I'll tell you, fine. So the Maharsha points out that it's possible that the whole issue with counting in Parshas Kisisa was tied into the Chet HaEgel. So it's possible that there's a whole Chet HaEgel tie-in, a whole kapara for the sin of the golden calf, and that's why the Gemara is choosing not to learn out from there. So it's possible that that doesn't establish a rule, that was just an episodic issue. When you begin to see these other psukim, they begin to tell us that halacha l'maisa counting Jews is profoundly problematic. So the pasuk says over here, the number of Jews will be like the sea on the shore, asher lo yimad, which cannot be counted. So the Gemara's understanding asher lo yimad, Rabbi will say, is actually a declarative statement, is a lav. You cannot count Jews. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer over b'shnei lav. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, if you count Jews, you are in violation of two lavin. Shnei Amar lo yimad v'lo yisaper. It says again, it shall not be measured and it shall not be counted. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonason, Rami Ksiv. Let's say we contrast the psukim. On one hand, it says v'ayom mispar b'nei Yisrael kichol hayam. One pasuk says that the number of Jewish people will be kichol hayam, like the sand on the shore of the sea. Uksiv asher lo yimad v'lo yisaper. But then it says, we shall not be measured, not be counted. So I will say, when it says that we will be like the sand of the sea, that tells you what? There is a number. So I will say, as much as I can't count the sand, there are a certain number of sand particles. So it sounds like we are countable. And then it says, we're immeasurable and uncountable. So which one is it? Are we measurable and uncountable, or immeasurable? So which one is it? Lokasha, kam bizman she Yisrael osir nitzono shal makom, kam bizman she'in osir Yisrael shal makom. So we'll say, so one is where we are performing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and one is where we are not performing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we're performing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are simply immeasurable. When we are not fulfilling the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we are measurable. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Om Mishum Abba Yosi Bendo, Stay Lokasha, Kan Bidei Adam, Kan Bidei Shem. But the other possibility is, it's impossible to count us Bidei Adam, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, can count us. So we'll say, it's important to understand this. We'll talk about that the whole issue of counting is in just a moment. But I will say, this notion that Klal Yisrael is uncountable. So first of all, I will say, that was never true. That was never true. And we have no indication that ever will be true. But remember, again, we're not a proselytizing religion. So it's not like that part of our messianic vision is that everyone becomes Jewish. We don't want everybody to become Jewish. We want Gentiles to remain Gentiles, and they should just be good Gentiles. That's all we want. The Jews have not cornered the market on God. Anyone and everyone can have a meaningful relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and all you need to do is keep your Shem Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. So this notion of Jews becoming uncountable, the Netziv understands that it is a concept ultimately, again, of what? Of influence. Of influence. When we say that Jews are uncountable, what that means is that the impact of Klal Yisrael on the world, the ability of the impact, the scope of the impact we have the ability to have is immeasurable. The impact we have the ability to give off is almost as if we were without limit. We were without number. In fact, the Netziv says, this is the whole pshat. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu, Av Hamon Goyim, you'll be a father of a multitude of nations. Supposed to say, is Avraham Avinu a father of a multitude of nations? Is he really? Did he ever become a father of a multitude of nations? Okay, he's the father of Am Yisrael. He's the father of Yishmael. A lot of people, multitude of nations. Then Tziv says, if you think about it, we'll say Avraham Avinu is the father of every major faith. Right? Every major faith religion, right? Every major faith traces itself back to an Abrahamic beginning. That's Avamon Goyim. Ultimately, again, Avraham Avinu exuded an influence on humanity like no other person in the history of the world. When we speak about this Yesod, that Klal Yisrael is Kichol Hayam, that we are like the sand of the sea, we were never like the sand of the sea, and there's no indication from a numeric perspective that we'll ever be like the sand of the sea. Elamai, the influence of Klal Yisrael on this world, you see this. You mamish see this all the time. The impact that the Jewish people have on the world is far outweighs our number, right? Far outweighs actually the number of Jews in this world. That's the bracha. Asher lo yisaper v'lo yimod. Incredible. Amar Rabbi Nilai bar Idi Amar Shmuel. Okay, so we'll say, let's talk about this just a moment. What's this problem with counting? Because we're all familiar with this, right? In fact, the Yenavosai, this Gemara is the Makar. Actually, it's brought down to the Maharsha. This idea of when you count for a minyan, we don't count Jews. Actually, again, Yenavosai, there is a minhag that you could count fingers, although you could end up with 27 people, even though you only have 10 Jews there. But this is the Makar for the minhag of how do we count the minyan? Counting is something we just don't do. So the Gemara tells us we don't do it. We'll say, what doesn't the Gemara tell us? Why don't we do it? So it's interesting. The Yaaros D, Yonason Eibeshitz writes as follows. He says, I'm going to quote to you. He says, the olam נידון נידון וכלל ישראל רובם כשרים הם, וכשמונה אחד, הרי הוא נפרד מהשני. This is incredible. In general, the world is judged by its majority. And the assumption is that the majority of Klal Yisrael, and even the majority of humanity, is good. So that's great. This is Ram Hilchos Tshuva. Ram Hilchos Tshuva says as long as the majority of the world is good, the world is sustained. So the good news is, at any given moment, the majority of Klal Yisrael is good, and the majority of the world is good. That's great. So therefore, again, if you're a member of humanity, you're in good shape because the world will be sustained because the majority is good. And if you're a member of Am Yisrael, the good news is that even if I'm in a state of personalistic disrepair, I'm not in a good place. But since I'm part of the Klal, therefore what? I am nidon achar harov. I am judged after the majority, and the majority is good. The majority is spiritually healthy. Says the Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz something so amazing. The moment you begin to count people is the moment you pull people out of the rove. You're one, you're two, you're three. You're pulling people out of the collective. Well, the moment you begin to pull people out of the collective, they're not part of the rove, which means what? They're looked at as individuals. When they're looked at as individuals, then their personal judgment is depending on their own personal zuchuyos and averos. And in any given moment, Rabbosai, it could be that I have more averos than mitzvos, and that could be problematic. So isn't this incredible? Therefore, Yonason Eibeshitz says, we don't count Jews because we want everyone to be embedded in the klal. Because when you are embedded in the klal, you have the safety of being part of the rove of the klal, and the rove of Klal Yisrael is always good. The rove is always good. Well, say, isn't this incredible? And it tells you the power, by the way, of being part of something bigger than yourself. The power of being part of Kehillah, the power of being part of community, the power of being part of Am Yisrael, that you're nidon achar harov. You get to kind of, for lack of a better term, hide yourself or cloak yourself in the collective piety of the nation. But the moment you begin to count is the moment you pull people out from the rove. The moment you pull people out from the rove, then at the end of the day, then they must stand on their own merits or chas v'shalom averos. And I will say again, we see this especially in everything that's happening in these days, right? What happened in Meron, the terror attack yesterday. I will say we see this, that there's a power of being part of the klal. You have to embed yourself in Klal Yisrael. You have to embed yourself. At the end, as part of the nation. It's true we're yechidim, we're individuals, but at the end of the day, the greatest koach we have is when we embed ourselves within the people, feeling the tsaras of our people, feeling the simchas of our people. That's where we derive our strength. But I will say there's one more piece with this. The Rama also has a whole other piece of this for us, which we don't have time for today. I will say there's also something else with Kook. Kook says something so beautiful. He says, when you count things, when you count people, you assign an identity to a person. You assign an identity, right? They will say, right? You're one, you're two, you're three. That's an identity. So I will say the problem with assigning defined identity to a person is that they could assume that they're locked into that identity. I will say, I'll give you an example. The Nazis, branded Jews. Branded Jews. Why did they brand Jews? Why did they put that? Again, many of us have some, I don't know if it's anyone parents, some of us parents, right? Certainly many of us grandparents, right? Earliest childhood memories, I remember of my grandmother, Zichron Livracha, right? Of her tattoo from Auschwitz on her arm. Why did they do that? Because that was part of the psychology of dehumanization. Because if you give someone a number, that's what you are. That's what you are. Your number 093, whatever. That's your number. It's tattooed right on your arm. That's who you are. And that's who you will always be. And don't try to become anything better or anything different. That's who you are. See, the problem with the number is a number assigns you an identity. We'll say, what is the greatest power of the Jew? The greatest power of the Jew is self-transcendence. The greatest power of the Jew is I can be whatever I want to be. I can be whoever I want to be. I was a certain person yesterday. That doesn't define who I want to be today, or I can be today. I have been a certain person for the last 40 years. That doesn't tell me who and what I can be in the next 40. I can become whoever I become. So Chazal say, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, don't count Jews. Because just because you're number 3 now doesn't mean you have to be number 3 forever. But the nature of people is, once you give them a number, that becomes their identity. Once you give them a number, that's why I'm a number 3 guy. That's why I've never been a number 1. It just never worked out for me. I've never been a number 1, right? I've always been a number 3 or number 9 or number 22. That's kind of who I am. I'm just a face in the mix over here. But at the end of the day, says Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Kook, we don't count Jews because we never want people to get locked into an identity. We want people to know the power of self-transcendence, the power of making myself into whatever and whoever I want to be. So it's incredible. It's almost like two opposite things. Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz says we don't count because we don't want people to be pulled out. We don't want you to be an individual. We want you to be embedded in the klal so that you could be nana, that you could benefit from the collective merit of Klal Yisrael. Rav Kook says we don't count people. Why? Because we don't want to ascribe to people. We don't want to take away people's individual identities. We don't want people to just see themselves as a chelik, as a part of the collective. We want every single Jew to understand you are an individual. You can be whatever you want to be, and you can be something different today than what you've been in for the rest of your life beforehand. So two opposite approaches, but they're both correct. They're both correct. We don't count because we need to be embedded in the klal, but at the end of the day, we don't count because we need to be individuals and not just part of the collective. Incredible yisod. So we'll say the Gemara says as follows, or we don't count ultimately, again, because we don't want to get locked in to any one specific identity, but we want to always harness the power of self-transcendence. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Nilai, Bar Idi, Amr Shmuel, Kevan Shenismad Adam Parnes Al Tzibur. This is beautiful. Once a person has been appointed to a position of leadership on the Tzibur, ultimately, again, Misasher, he becomes wealthy. Where do we find that from? The Gemara says, because this is incredible. Shaul, in the beginning of his monarchy, how did he count Jews? How did he count them? With pottery shards. Ulebasof, and how did he count them in the end? Ulebasof, vayifkedeim betloim. And in the end, how did he count them? How did he count them? With sheep. So we'll say, see, Baruch Hashem, Shaul became wealthy. So we'll say, so it's interesting. The Gemara presupposes that whose sheep did Shaul count the people with? His sheep. his sheep. That he had, right, he told people, come take one of my sheep. I don't know that they could keep it, but come take my sheep. And again, each of you put a sheep in a, right, I guess it was in like one pen, come put it in a different pen, we'll count how many people there are. I, the Gemara said, maybe people brought their own sheep. Imke my Rabu said the Milsa. If that's the case, then what is the pasuk coming to convey? So I said the Torah doesn't, the Navi doesn't need to tell us that he counted with sheep. The fact that he counted with sheep, the Navi is telling us that to show us that once he was appointed to a position of leadership, Baruch Hashem, he became wealthy. We'll say it appears that the logic behind that with the king, I guess this with or what Rav Nilai's statement is. We'll say, what does that have to do? Persons appointed to a position of leadership, so they become wealthy. How do the two shtim? We'll say it could be that leadership brings with it so many overwhelming challenges and headaches, that at least the Kodesh Baruch Hu says to the leader, if you're going to deal with all of the headaches, at least you don't have to worry about the ol haparnasa, right? You don't have to worry about money. You have every other headache imaginable under the sun, but at least with money, ultimately that you won't have to worry about. That's that word shal. So the Gemara goes weiter. But see, this is incredible Gemara. We should push davening to 7:30. So the Gemara says as follows: Vayorav benachal. So let's listen to this. The pasuk says this is when Shaul went to war against Amalek. So it says by Amalek, he fought with Amalek Banachal. But now Banachal means the stream. Amr Mani al Iske Nachal. Shaul struggled with the issue of the Nachal. Now we'll say Nachal means a stream or a riverbed. What does this mean? When Hashem said to Shaul, Lech ve'kisas Amalek, Shaul was given the sacred mission of destroying Amalek. So Shaul says to himself, Uma nefesh achas amra Torah, have egla arufa. If for one nefesh, the Torah says, bring an egla arufa. Again, you find a person murdered in between two cities and you don't know who murdered him, right? So the Torah said, bring an egla arufa, and a calf. And Rabbi said, remember again, where do you go out and behead the calf? Where do you decapitate the calf? Banachal, in the riverbed. So kol nefashos halal alachas kama v'kama. So Shaul struggled. If for one person was killed, we bring an egla arufa, and now HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants me to wipe out an entire nation, and even if you say the people did something terrible, behema machata, what did the animals do? Gidolim chatu, and if ultimately again adults went ahead and sinned, kitanim machatu, what did children do? So Shaul struggled with the mitzvah of mechias Amalek. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to wipe out Amalek, and he struggles vayorav banachal, meaning he went in and he said, if we for one person we do egla arufa, then for a whole nation, how could I do this? To which the Gemara will say something so profound. Yotza Baskol va'amrlo al tihi tzadik harbe. So I will say Baskol came out and said to Shaul, don't be more righteous than God. Don't be too righteous. Don't be too righteous. So I will say such an incredible yesod that ultimately again the Ribono Shel Olam gives us mitzvahs. I will say. And just because sometimes the mitzvahs don't appeal to our sensitivities or to our isms, or the mitzvahs don't make sense according to quote-unquote our hashkafas or our worldview, Alti Tzadik Harbe, the Ribono Shel Olam knows much better than us. The Ribono knows much more than us. And whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us to do, even if sometimes it doesn't make sense or doesn't appeal to our worldview, Al Tihi Tzadik Harbe. Now we'll say, because Shaul exhibited these sensitivities, we contend with Amalek to this very day. Alti tzaddik. So we have to stop over for today. We're not finished with Shaul. We'll pick up more with Shaul tomorrow. Let's say shkoyach.